You want to make the upcoming year the year that you're going to get more serious about making games and maybe even starting your own little game studio. Whether you're a brand new beginner who hasn't really touched that much of games but maybe is just a very avid gamer, or you're someone who maybe has joined a few game jams and dabbled around in Godot or Game Maker Studio or whatever. All of these are fine. I'm here to give you some of the advice of, hey, what is our studio doing and what can you do as well to not make the same mistakes that we did, because that has cost us basically 2 years of running around in circles and not really getting anywhere. Because at the end of the day, making games has never been easier. Like, you have basically all of the big engines are completely free. There's tons of resources on the internet as well. Whereas it used to be something where you needed to be a really good programmer and you needed to like make all the art yourself and you couldn't easily get onto all of these distribution platforms like, for example, Steam or even consoles. All of that has opened now. And there's some issues with that. The floodgates definitely have opened. More and more people like you, I have to be honest, are watching videos of these kind and are like, hey, yeah, I want to make my own games. The good news is that at the end of the day, not that many people actually manage to pull through and end up releasing their first game. And the reason for that is that game development and kind of the way that you should make games, I don't know if that's really the right thing to say, is changing rapidly in the past few years. There's definitely been a paradigm shift in one, what do gamers want, and two, what are game devs capable of doing? What used to be more of that indie dream of making those open world RPGs, kind of like games like Zelda and whatever, was cool and very noble. I have to be honest, you're gonna have to wait with that one for next year. That's probably not going to be the approach right now because you cannot guarantee that your game's gonna be a success anytime soon, and you're going to be spending multiple years probably on making that game, especially if you're a solo developer. Game development, do not underestimate, it takes a long time to get anything done really, and there are some things we can do, and that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about in this video. But even then, those longer games don't make as much sense, because what they also used to rely on a lot is that, hey, you the developer, you just had to upfront basically make enough of a game to get that vertical slice. You had to make a demo, and you can take that demo, go to publishers, go to GDC or a Gamescom or whatever, have a bunch of meetings, and then walk out with fat stacks of money so you can then spend that money on paying yourself and paying other developers to make your game a reality. That is honestly not happening anywhere anymore. Publishers are going under like every week. There's less and less money to go around. Even established publishers are cutting ties with their old developers and things like that because there's just too much risk for them at this point, and games are kind of unpredictable. Like, as much as, you know, you like to see Activision pump out the next Call of Duty cookie cutter every year, even those games are not really what audiences want anymore. What do they want? Nobody knows. That's your task to go and find out. So how do we do that? And that is kind of the strategy and the reason that this video is called the framework or like blueprint, I'm not fully certain yet, to making a game studio in 25 and not making a game in 2025, is that you should focus more on smaller games. This is something that we've talked about before. It's the approach that we're doing now as well, with pretty decent success, where games that we made in a single month have pulled in more than $15,000 just by focusing on a single good mechanic and then making something that is appealing to a decently large audience and then getting influencer marketing to take the rest of it. That's basically everything I'm going to be talking about in this video. In like a one sentence, don't click off though, because I do have more tips and more in-depth advice for you. But that is what it comes down to. No longer should you be like, I'm going to make my dream open world game, like I said, and it's going to be amazing and everyone is going to want it. Maybe you do early access. That is increasingly harder and harder. And also, like I said, there's a very big chance that you're going to give up somewhere along the way. Because I think you also have to be a bit humble. I mean, it's something that we also still forget sometimes, is that whilst you've maybe joined a game jam, or not even, there's a very big difference between playing games and making games, like I said. And realistically, your first games are not going to be magnum opuses. Even developers where their first release or their first big release, like for example Lethal Company and things like that, were massive successes, that was not the first game they made. That was not their first foray into game development. They've made plenty of other prototypes, smaller game jams, worked on itch.io, for example, to upload their own builds and things like that for other games that never ended up going somewhere. If you go into this expecting that your game's gonna be amazing from day one, I got bad news for you. You're not gonna be making the next Stardew Valley. What you'll often hear from game developers when they give you advice on making games is always like, hey, look, your first games are going to fail. And that's okay. But why don't we just make those games a bit quicker then? Because if we know that the first games are going to fail anyway, why would we spend multiple years working on a set game for it only to be a failure anyway? Sure, there's that very slim chance that maybe it is going to be the next Stardew Valley, but let's be honest, realistically, I think you're better off just buying a lottery ticket at that point. It's less effort and probably a higher return on investment as well. So that's what this strategy, like I said, involves around. Making a bunch of smaller games, like I would say 4, maybe 5, or maybe 3 in a single year. It all depends, of course, on how much time you have. Do you do this full time? Do you do this on the side? And all of that as well. And what's more important here is not just games that are fast to make, but games that are fast to validate. And what I mean with this validation is the game fun? I think YouTubers and game dev YouTubers, we often get bogged down in like, hey, what engine should I use? What all of that? It doesn't matter what engine you use because all engines should allow you to make fun games. So making games that are fun is a key principle, and getting said games fun means that you need to test them early, because if you have to spend 2 months on implementing certain mechanics and features before you can actually understand, are people going to like this game, yes or no? Well, that's a lot of time wasted already. I think a great example of this is the game Dome Keeper. You've probably heard about it. What those developers did is they uploaded, like, I think over 12 games is what they made. Like smaller games where it wasn't like a full-on game. It wasn't a full-on experience they could sell, but they uploaded to their itch.io page and they looked at which ones got the most traction, which ones were the most fun. And they validated that way. If you make those smaller builds where you immediately focus on, hey, a certain mechanic that's really fun, that is much easier to realize, okay, this is a game that's probably going to be successful. Versus, like I said, making an open world game and you have this giant open world, that's very easy to make, but then filling all of that with content, making all the mechanics, all the combat, all the enemies, all of those things, I'm just using that genre because it's probably the most common one our viewers want to make, it's going to take a long time before you can validate that fun. And that's not what we want to do. I think a good example, if you look at what we did, is we made a game, Unicycle Pizza Time. You may have heard of it before. It's a kind of only up style game where you're driving a unicycle and you have to go through a city and you have to make sure you don't fall over. We had that first prototype of, hey, is this game fun, yes or no? Working in about, I would say, 2 days. And then we added multiplayer on it, which also added things. We knew after a week already, basically, this game is fun. We couldn't stop playing it ourselves. And from then on, if you reach that point, okay, we've got some validation. Get some other people to play it if you can, of course. Let's keep working on that. And that is going to be the thing where you focus on one specific mechanic, whether it is that unicycle or whether that is your combat, for example, and just expand a little bit upon that is, I think, the better approach. You don't need to reinvent the wheel for every game. You just have to be better than another game. And you don't have to be better in everything. You have to be better in the one thing that you are going to be specializing about with your specific game. You also shouldn't split up the year into like 4 equal blocks. I think especially for that first game, especially if this is one of the first games you're making, keep that scope down. Focus on a single mechanic, whether that is top-down shooting or whatever, and then look at only that gameplay stuff. Forget about the fancy UIs and all of the cool interfaces and things like that. Make sure that it's playable, and if your final platform destination is only going to be a platform like itch.io, which is where it's much easier to upload just a build and things like that, kind of to get feedback for yourself of, hey, can I start to finish make a game where there's an actual storyline, for example, or there's actual quests and progression, things like that, not just a single level with a single mechanic and that's it. Doing something like itch.io for your first project, scoping down to do only like a month of development time, is actually, I think, a really valid approach in this case, where, you know, maybe your first game, like I said, shouldn't even be on Steam. You shouldn't have to worry with the incorporation, so you can make a Steam developer account, paying $100 yet, until you figure out, okay, can I actually make game to begin with? Like getting the website and things like that is very nice for your studio. I know it makes you feel good, but it's not going to give you any value really, except just making you feel good for half a day because, oh, look, I have a website and no games. I think that is a good approach, and it's going to teach you a lot already, because I can talk about all of this and like all of the top tips for like making your game, whatever. If you don't go and make your own games and really write your own code, get your own first like initial game mechanic idea, I think that you can always learn so much more from having gone through the trenches yourself. And I think that is an approach here, getting that first build out sooner, but not having that high stakes yet of being a full Steam release, because Steam releases, they take more effort. Like I said, you have to pay upfront money, and you also kind of want to get a return on that investment, so you have to do more about marketing your game, you have to be more active, you have, like, players expect a more polished and like bit longer experience as well. I think those are some more things to keep in mind, and you probably don't want to overload yourself that first game you're making already with also making the marketing, making the capsules and things like that, when realistically, maybe you're not even fully certain what you're going to be doing. Diving down a bit more on those genres, the question that I often get is like, hey, what should I make? I made a video about it where I go more in depth that you can look at if you want. But I would stay away from the very easy genres like, oh, I'm gonna make a 2D platformer, or if you do want to make them, I think that's fine, but I wouldn't go and put them on Steam. I think that could be a good thing to figure out your engine and put it on itch.io, and then wrap the scope up very shortly. So it is like, hey, just 2 weeks or 4 weeks tops, and then you put it on itch.io, and then you move on to maybe the bigger genres or the genres that have more of an interest from other players on Steam. I think games that are like, for example, first-person style games can often do really well. Horror games are really nice. I would stay away from management games because whilst they sound cool and like city builders and whatever, and they're pretty high earners on Steam, the amount of effort required to get all of those mechanics working together means that you can't validate those games early. And that is, like I said, if you want to go this approach, validation and figuring out as soon as possible, is this game fun, is going to be the most important thing. Now, once you've actually found that concept of, hey, I found a game idea that I think is fun, and let's say you're planning on spending 2 months on it, or right now 1 week into development, and you've got that first core concept, whether it's someone riding a unicycle or a fun game idea I once had, but I don't think we'll ever make it. It's like, you know, those ibex goats that climb dams. Like, it could be something very simple. Once you have a game like that, or something else like your roguelite, your survivor like, or anything, then the question is, how are you going to make sure that other people know that you're making the game? And that's when we get to the whole world of marketing. This can be super scary. The good news is you can basically ignore everything except one marketing strategy and get like 95% of the results. Forget about posting on XD Everything app or Blue Sky by now. You're not going to be getting good quality wishlists from that because also it's mainly other developers. Forget about things like devlogs, because also making quality devlogs that actually convert and don't just once again appeal to developers takes a lot of effort. You can spend a month basically if you want, if you have no clue yet how do good devlogs work, on making that devlog alone for your game. And then you still have to make the game as well. That's also not really the best approach. Going to physical events is something I hear often. Don't do that either. You're kind of gonna be bottlenecked by just the size of the event and how many people in a day can go past your booth. The real way to market your game, highest return on investment by far, is influencer outreach, which means that you're going to be focusing on, ideally after, let's say we have the 2-month period, like I said, after about 6 weeks, you should have a version of your game that is mostly playable already. Maybe you don't have all of the levels in yet, or like the late game progression, for example, but it is already a game that feels pretty alright. It's got a lot of features implemented already. What you want to do then is you want to do influencer outreach. So you're going to wrap all of this up into a neat little demo, for example, or another kind of gameplay build, and you're going to upload it to Steam already. So people can play it. Steam also has a lot of trust behind it. And then you're just going to find other influencers who play games like yours. In our case for Unicycle Pizza Time, because that's the best case study that we have, we looked at people who played Only Up, Chained Together, Getting Over It, all of those rage games kinda. And then we just made a big list of all of the email addresses, because you can find them relatively easily on YouTube, just clicking like their profile information, adding all of them into an Excel, and this is gonna take like a few hours. And it's kind of boring, but trust me, this is going to be oh so worth it from the leverage you can get from this. You're going to send them emails. You're gonna send them an email, and I made videos about how to write the exact emails as well. I'll link all of those below and like make cards here. You're gonna write them an email. It's like, hey, I'm the developer of this game. It's coming out soon. I'm giving you an exclusive look of the game. I think it's going to be a really good fit for your audience because you've played similar games like it before as well. If you have any questions, let me know. And then you give them a Steam key for that early build. Because what you can get then, and this is huge, this has happened for us as well, is that maybe they'll play your games. It depends on the size. Like if you go for smaller YouTubers, you have often more guarantee, but less impact, so to say, if you go like sub 50,000 subscribers. Or what we've also done is, you shoot those Hail Marys to, for example, YouTubers with 7 million plus subscribers. And maybe they won't immediately cover your game. But my God, when they cover your game, you're getting, in our case, literally more than 1 million people looking at your game, wishlisting said game, and if the game is already out yet, buying said game. Those wishlists are crucial because wishlists allow you to have launch momentum, basically. The moment your game comes out, everyone who has wishlisted the game, they will immediately know that the game is out. Maybe they were interested in it, so they can go ahead and buy it. Because you want to get to those 10 reviews on Steam as fast as possible, because that is when you'll get shown more in the discovery queue and things like that, and that's when your game can really take off. There's a whole bunch of extra stuff. Don't release during Steam big sales, like the winter sale, summer sale, spring sale, whatever. Make sure that your launch days are not going to be coinciding with those, because then the Steam store page UI completely changes and you get less visibility. Always launch with a launch discount of like 10%, 15% or something to give people more incentive to immediately buy the game once they get that wishlist email. And then from then on, basically participate in as many festivals as you can. Like they're always going to be helping you, and keep up with the influencer outreach. Even if someone doesn't immediately react to your game, we've had YouTubers that we emailed like 2 months earlier, and then only 2 months later, like I said, they will actually cover a game. But still, the impact of that is pretty substantial. Now, you've survived the entire year and you've made a bunch of games. What's next? Well, if all goes to plan, you should have achieved the dream of a lot of finance gurus on YouTube: passive income. That's how I like to call it, because at the end of the day, once you've released the game, yeah, you still have some updates and maybe some bug fixes and things like that, but it's on Steam and it's going to stay on Steam until Gabe Newell decides to sell Steam to fund his sheep farm in New Zealand or whatever. And you don't really have to do much more anymore. Like, Steam will keep pushing your game a little bit, like content creators. If they make content about your game as well, their videos will keep popping up in people's algorithm. The rate will decline, but you will still be getting some sales. For certain games, it's gonna be one sale a month if it's a bad launch. For other games, you're making a few $100 a month. And the beauty lies in all of those stacking up. The more games you release, even if every game individually makes like $10 to $100 a month, if you've released 4 games in the past year, that's already a pretty substantial sum. And I think honestly, $10 to $100 is already kind of like at least the $10 range is really bad. Even our Game Forge industry, which has been out for over 1.5 years at this point, with mixed reviews, like 69% or something, is still making between $50 and $150 every month. And it's a game that, it was the first game we made. Like I said, your first game probably isn't gonna be the best. It's still making some money. People are still buying it. If you can stack that multiple times, it gives you more freedom to, in 2026, maybe take a bit more risks. Stop focusing so much on, okay, let's make these smaller games. Let's focus on maybe adding 2 cool mechanics instead of just 1. And let's expand the scope a bit, maybe add some more levels, tell a bit more of a story, instead of focusing purely on validating that good gameplay idea. You can then maybe also, depending on how your financials are, look at, okay, can I now take some more risk making those larger projects? Not certain, hey, how are they gonna go? You also know more about, hey, how should you market? Because everyone who's covered your game before for influencers, you have more of a way in because they know you already. So you can not exactly guarantee coverage, but you're going to have a bigger chance of getting covered, for example. There's a lot more. Maybe by the end of next year, I'm gonna make a more follow-up video that I'll pin here or something, where I talk a bit more about, hey, what's the plan for next year? I think already if you're able to do this, you should be on the right track to having a pretty neat little side income stream if you can keep up with the development and if you can make sure that you validate those games as early as possible and you don't waste time making games that aren't perfect. We've made that mistake before. We spent time on games and we didn't validate on time. Is it fun? Is there interest in it from other people? And is it something that we think is going to be able to sell, basically? Keep all of those things in mind. I think if you do focus on the validation, honestly, game development, it's also going to be more fun for you because the game you're working on is always going to be fun to begin with. You're not going to be working on your game, second guessing yourself, oh, is this game going to even be fun when I release it? That's all I have to say. Thank you very much for watching. I wish you the very best of luck with game development. Let me tell you, it is very much a brutal industry at certain times. It's all fun and games until you have to make a fun game is one of my favorite quotes from working here in game development industry. But if it is something that you're interested in, I highly suggest you go down below and subscribe because we upload 2 videos every week talking about the things that we've been learning, making our own games, running our own studio, and the things, yeah, like I said, that we learned along the way. I think there's a treasure trove of information on this YouTube channel, so I think it's going to be very interesting for you. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!